So this webinar series is part of a campaign to support shelters and rescues throughout New Zealand and the great work that they do. So far, we've heard from Carolyn Press-McKenzie, who talked about establishing a rescue organisation and the struggles and challenges that went with that. And we've also heard from Dr. Natalie Dale-Gray, who talked about feline-friendly interactions. So if you weren't able to make it to these webinars, they're up on our website and available for you to have a look at. And this webinar will also be up there as well. So if you know anybody else that would like to watch it, then please pass it on. They're all free to view. So I'd just like to talk a little bit about the Shelter Register Aotearoa program before we get started. So this is an initiative that several of you here tonight are involved in, which is fantastic. And the aim is to create a national shelter database. So we want to be able to capture the number of animals that are coming into the shelters and that are going out of the shelters. And this will help us to understand the extent of the welfare problem that we currently have, which is pretty overwhelming. And by capturing this data, it's going to enable us to provide solid evidence that we can then take to central government and to local councils, and to help create legislative change to promote a better outcome for the animals. There are lots of other benefits that we hope to achieve in this program as well, and especially for the personnel that are involved, like a source of resource and community and collaborative efforts to help make everything easier. So we're now 4 months into this program, and already the data is proving to be really useful. So that's fantastic. We've been using it to support campaigns that we're advocating for with MPI and local councils. And we're currently working on the report for the first 3 months of this program, and hopefully that should be out in the next few weeks. So for anyone working in the shelter or rescue industry, specifically with cats and dogs at this stage, if you're not signed up, then would really appreciate your time in taking part in this program. You can go to the website, which is shown here, to find more information about that, or you can contact me directly and I can give you information that you need to know. So without further ado, I would like to get on to the reason that we are here tonight, and that is to listen to Dr. Rebekah Scotney talking about compassion fatigue in the shelter industry. So a little bit about Rebekah. Rebekah graduated from the University of Queensland in 1993 after taking her first position within the School of Veterinary Science soon after that. Rebekah is an experienced veterinary technical officer and the first qualified veterinary nurse to hold a PhD in the veterinary sciences in Australia. Specialising in occupational trauma and compassion fatigue, Rebekah is a passionate researcher and educator focusing on the psychology of human-animal relationships. She's currently supervising several postgrad students through their research higher degree pursuits. With a strong background in animal husbandry and welfare, behaviour and ethics, and more than 25 years experience in varied animal and veterinary research and teaching paradigms, Rebekah has a passion for teaching and a commitment to instill a desire in people to embrace lifelong learning. Having lived experience of occupational trauma and compassion fatigue, Rebekah presents extensively in this subject area, as well as in psychological well-being and emotional intelligence across all sectors of animal-related industries and occupations. She's highly regarded in her field, particularly for her leadership and mentoring expertise. So we're very lucky to have Rebekah with us here tonight to share her knowledge, and really looking forward to hearing what you have to say. So over to you, Rebekah.
Thanks, Sarah. That's awesome. So I will just share my screen and welcome everybody. I'm so pleased to see so many here today. Now, is that all good?
Yep,
you can see that. Fabulous. So yeah, as Sarah said, I have worked in the animal industry pretty much my whole life. And just to add a little bit to that, in terms of my background, I have worked in many, well, with many different species of animals. So when I did my undergraduate degree, I specialised in production animals, and I got my first job working with rats, mice, guinea pigs, and rabbits. And then I moved to dogs and cats, and I've worked with horses and sheep and goats, and you name it, I've worked with every species. I've had a lot of fairly integral relationships with animal shelters and various rescues, including greyhound rescue, as well as various other breed-specific rescues, as well as rescues in general, dogs, cats, and the like. So I do like to just point that out, because I think it's important for those that I speak to and speak with to know that I have that lived experience and that understanding of the nuances of a number of different animal areas and disciplines. So I hope to bring a little bit of my own experience and give the audience that sort of understanding that I do know where you're coming from. I do know some of the things that you experience on a daily basis, and I get it, and I'm so passionate about that, and looking after our mental well-being, which is what brings me to do this stuff as often as I can. So hopefully you'll get a little bit out of this evening. I called this talk RSI of the emotional self, because I think that what we often do in rescue work is this engage in this sort of repetitive strain, and it's a repetitive emotional strain that we engage in, and I think recognizing that is the first step to making sure that we understand what we do and the effect that it has on us, and what we can do to look after ourselves to prevent compassion fatigue, burnout, and making sure that we're going to be looking after ourselves so that we can continue to look after those that can't look after themselves. So it's really about this idea of engaging in sustainable well-being. And the work that I do, I like to term mental health ergonomics, because when you think of the word ergonomics, you often think of your workspace and the equipment that you use, so your desk, your chair, anything that makes your physical well-being much better in the workplace. What we really need to do is start to think of ergonomics in terms of our psychological health and well-being, and what are the sorts of tools that we can and should and will put in place to look after our psychological well-being. So that's just a bit of a brief introduction. The other thing that I want you to all sort of think about this evening is happiness. So since the dawn of time, happiness has attracted the attention of, many great philosophers: Confucius, Buddha, Socrates, Aristotle. All of these people have engaged in thinking about the concept of happiness, and it's been variously conceptualized and defined throughout history by, all of these people, and it's often influenced by the thinking of that time. So today it's sort of recognized as the experience of joy, contentment, or positive well-being in general. So we also think of happiness combined with a sense that one's life is good, okay? So that our life is meaningful and that it's worthwhile. The definition of happiness itself encompasses two distinct components. So one is what we term eudaimonic happiness, and this comes from meaningful pursuits, and it's associated with life satisfaction. Okay, so if you think about the work that we do every day, it's really meaningful for us, and we gain a lot of happiness from engaging in the things that we do in terms of animal care and sheltering. The other one is what we term hedonic happiness, which comes from pleasure or goal fulfillment, and it's often associated with positive effect. So again, if you think about the work that you do every day, we get a lot of pleasure, and we hit goals and we hit targets, whether it's the number of animals that we're rehoming, the number of animals that we're bringing into the shelter and looking after, and, you know, perhaps we're doing a little bit of behavior modification and getting an animal to the point where, you know, where it can be adopted, or it's ill and we get it well enough to then be adopted out. So it's a really important sort of concept to think about in terms of happiness. So I think that, you know, when we look at happiness as well, there's this emerging scholarship or study of happiness, and it's extended beyond just the study of sort of our own individual happiness, and it encompasses a group or organizational happiness, because I think that in the workplaces that we all work in, we can work on our own individual happiness, but it's also really important for us to engage in the happiness of the whole team and the whole organisation that we work in. And that organisation could be made up of 2 or 3 people, you know, so your shelter, or it could be, you know, a greater organisation. So it's important to know that, yes, we are absolutely responsible for our own individual happiness, but we have to bring that into the workplace as well. And it's very doable, you know, like, it's something that has to be worked at, particularly when times are tough, but we can, you know, we can work on it as individuals and as a team. And that's the sort of thing that I'm going to talk about tonight. So we're going to talk about compassion fatigue and the work that we do and the hurt that it can cause us. But then we're going to really focus on what are the things that we can do to maintain our happiness and our well-being. Okay. It's important, I think, you know, when I talk about happiness in a lot of different audiences, you know, the one thing I do say is that, you know, like, I'm not saying that we're all a bunch of miserable buggers. We can be at times, but far from it. The work that we do brings us so much joy and happiness. You know, we're enthusiastic, we love what we do, we get joy from our successes, and we enjoy working with our colleagues, with the animals. But there is pain and trauma and heartache and frustration that comes from the work that we do. So we need to acknowledge that, and we need to acknowledge that there is an emotional effect from the work that we do, and we need to understand it, and we need to understand the effects that it has on us as individuals and on our colleagues, because one of the greatest combatants of compassion fatigue is banding together as a team and working as a team and understanding your colleagues. The other thing that's really important is for us to discuss it openly, wholeheartedly, and compassionately, without fear of judgment, you know, and that last point is really important, because as we know, there's a certain amount of stigma associated with psychological ill-being. So, you know, we need to crack that stigma and make sure that we are talking compassionately and non-judgmentally. So in order to do that, we do need to develop tools and resources that we can draw from, both as individuals and as a team. So what might work for us as an individual, we might need to expand that to work for all of us as a team as well. We don't want to, one of the things we don't want to do is have this reactive approach to stuff. We don't want reactive measures. We don't want band-aids. We want prophylactics. All right. So if you think of prophylactics that we give our animals to prevent disease and whatnot, then we want to do the same for ourselves in terms of our psychological well-being. So we really want this whole massive bucket of proactive measures that build and nourish our well-being, which in turn will nourish our happiness. So, compassion fatigue. When I first started working in the animal sciences, I was absolutely overwhelmed by all of the emotions that I experienced, and at different times for different reasons. And nobody told me about the feelings that I might experience. So the feelings of guilt when I couldn't save something, the feelings of sadness when I was having to euthanize so many, you know, animals on a daily or a weekly basis. And then the pure anger, you know, the anger at people who would not look after their animals, you know, who would bring them to a shelter, who would take them to the council pounds, you know, all of those those things that, you know, I'm sure you could think of a number of different scenarios where you would have all of these feelings for different reasons that you can think of off the top of your head, you know. And certainly nobody told me or warned me about how difficult it would be to talk about how my work made me feel. You know, when I first had my very first mental health episode, it was probably I've been in this industry for nearly 30 years. So it was probably a good, 25 years ago. I was probably 4 or 5 years into my career. And back then, compassion fatigue just wasn't a term. Like, I had no idea about why I was feeling the things that I was feeling. And then talking to people about the things that I had to do in my job every day. It was really difficult. And I don't know whether any of you have felt the same sorts of things previously or still do. So my job, I think, is to educate people about what compassion fatigue is, facilitate conversations, and encourage people to have these open conversations with their colleagues and others that, are kindred spirits, I suppose, because talking, I think, is one of the most important things when it comes to psychological well-being associated with the work that we do with animals. I really love this quote when you think about it in terms of compassion fatigue. So the expectation that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is as unrealistic as expecting to be able to walk through water without getting wet. That hits the nail, like it's absolutely what we do on a daily basis. In this industry, I suppose. I don't like using the word industry, but just for ease. So why do we suffer compassion fatigue? I think one of the reasons is our vulnerability. And vulnerability is important because it allows us to connect with others. It's sort of the gateway to a range of different experiences and emotions that we feel on a daily basis. So that joy and love and kindness and contentment, the trust, the sadness, the frustration, so the good and the bad emotions. But when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, this is when we risk getting hurt, all right? And in the work that we do, we know that we're going to get hurt, but we do it anyway. What often happens is that we perhaps start to find that we're getting this sense of feeling numb to external stimuli, or we might be participating in behaviours that have an adverse effect on us, such as, drinking alcohol, taking drugs, whatever the case might be. So if we're not looking after our psychological well-being and this compassion fatigue infiltrates in, it can result in these numbing behaviours, and these are our sort of band-aids. These are the short-term coping mechanisms that some people move to in order to sort of stop that hurt. But the thing about compassion fatigue and the numbing is that not only does it numb the bad, but it also numbs the good. Okay, and this is where learning how to acknowledge and accept our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions to any given situation, and then actively reflecting on these to becomes such an important part of a healthy mind and facilitating a healing process, because what we don't afford ourselves in this line of work is that healing process, and it is so important. Generally we will just go from one day to the next day to the next week to the next month. We've just got to get through this bit, or we've just got to get through tick season, we've just got to get through the kitten tsunami season, whatever the next thing is, and but we'll get through that next one, and then the next massive event or thing happens, and we sort of keep saying to ourselves, we'll just get through this and then we'll look after ourselves, or we'll just get through this and we'll look after ourselves, and in the end we find it's just snowballed, and we've done nothing because we haven't made that time. And we'll talk about time, because that's one of the things that that comes back at me from people across a number of different animal-related occupations, we don't have time. So we will talk about time. So as I said, that numbing is not selective. And if we overly distance ourselves from the negative emotions and experiences, we really do become unable to enjoy the positive ones. So that's an important point. Another reason is our empathy. So these are our felt responses to stories or circumstances or animals with their injuries or their predicaments that they might be in. And it's also about the emotion of others. So not only are we affected by the animals and the trauma and the plight of the animals that are in our care, we are also vicariously affected by the emotions of the people that we work with. So if we've got colleagues that are doing it really tough, sometimes we can take that on. And it's important for us to recognize that and make sure that we're doing things for ourselves to sort of prevent that vicarious trauma or limit it anyway. When we engage in empathy, and we don't even do that as a conscious choice, but when we do look at things that evoke these felt responses, that requires a lot of emotional investment and engagement on our part. And as I said, often it's subconscious. We just do it anyway. We do it naturally. The other thing is our compassion. And so this is the desire we have or the action we take to relieve the suffering of others. And again, that takes energy. It takes time and it takes energy. So compassion fatigue is about work-related primary or secondary exposure to extreme or traumatic stressful events. And it's considered to be twofold. So the first component of of compassion fatigue is burnout. And often burnout's measured by exhaustion, our levels of frustration, anger, and depression. And secondly, it's measured by secondary traumatic stress. I'm sure that's a term you've heard before. And this refers to the negative effects of these extreme or traumatic situations that we find ourselves in. And it can include things like each of us experiencing fear, sleep difficulties, nightmares, intrusive images, not wanting to go to work, being at work but not being sort of present, thinking about or being reminded of traumatic situations or experiences by a smell, a song, any of those sorts of things. So compassion fatigue is made up of those two things. And when we measure compassion fatigue in somebody, we measure burnout, secondary traumatic stress, and compassion satisfaction. And so compassion satisfaction, we will also have a quick chat about tonight. So when we think about compassion fatigue, we know that it evolves specifically from the work that we do. So the relationship between us and our animals or our colleagues, our clients, however that sort of might fit in with your workplace. In contrast to burnout, we know that those who suffer from compassion fatigue continue to provide care when their own personal, psychological, and physical reserves are depleted. The caregiver is often unable to detach or obtain perspective in order to heal themselves. They have this very altruistic, tunneled vision, like, I've got to keep going, I've got to keep going. If I don't keep going, the animals aren't going to be looked after, and so we often just put our own well-being on every level to the back and just force ourselves to keep going. Those suffering compassion fatigue generally still really love their jobs, and it's hard not to. Like, we work with animals, we're always going to love doing that. However, what happens is that our self-care and the quality of care for others can be compromised. If we don't stop and take care of ourselves and give ourselves time to heal from the trauma and the stressful situations that we've found ourselves in, it compromises the quality of care that we provide to those animals. So it is super important. All right. You can change jobs. All right. So if you're burnt out, you think about burnout, you could change jobs and the burnout will disappear, because burnout's generally about resources, management, workload, like all of those sorts of things. So you can change jobs and the burnout will disappear. But if you've got compassion fatigue and you change jobs, the compassion fatigue will follow you because it's an emotional felt response. You can't walk out of a door and stop feeling the emotions that are so intense within you in the moment. We're not robots, and a lot of people will say leave work at work and home at home. What? I don't even understand that, because we're not robots. We can't just flick a switch and walk out a door and think, yep, no, that's all in there, and I'm not going to take it with me wherever I'm going. Emotion doesn't work like that, and everything that we do on a daily basis, whether it's at work or at home or somewhere else, is based on emotion. And whether that emotion is positive emotions or negative emotions, they're emotions, and you cannot just switch them off like a light bulb. So we need to ensure, when we think about that we are, again, as I said, putting these protective mechanisms in place to combat, to alleviate, but more importantly, to heal. Okay. So how does compassion fatigue manifest? In a number of different ways. But I think some of the things that are really important to sort of think about to start with is that we live along this stress continuum, okay? And we can slide backwards and forwards along that continuum where we're doing really well, we're in the green, we're talking to our colleagues, we're engaged, we're doing all the things that we would normally do, functioning at a high level, life is great. Then we could move into the yellow zone where we're, perhaps avoiding colleagues, avoiding jobs that we would normally do, avoid social activity because we're feeling a bit depleted. And then when we're really in a bad place or heading down that really dark place, this is where we perhaps are hiding. We're not going to work. We are avoiding and hiding from life in itself. Now, the thing is that we can move up and down that continuum in different stages of our life. So, it could well be that we've lost a loved one, and so that does mess with our psychological well-being, and we can head into the red zone. Okay, so what are the sorts of things that we can understand about ourselves when we are moving through the yellow zone and heading into the red zone? Because we don't want to get into the red zone. All right, so it's important for us to think about what it is or how stress and distress manifests in ourselves. The other important thing is to know that responses and reactions to different or the same events, same type of events, can vary over time. So what doesn't affect you one month might absolutely affect you the following month. And what we also know about emotional trauma and trauma input is that it's cumulative. Okay, so when you get through one traumatic event or difficult time, if you don't address that and look after yourself and process it and reflect on it and heal from it, it will still sit there, and the next trauma input will just dump on top, and it just keeps dumping on top, dumping on top, dumping on top. So we need to make sure that we are healing from every traumatic or difficult situation as we move through. We also talk about coping strategies. And we know that there are many coping strategies that will translate from our personal life to our work life and vice versa. But it's also important to know that some strategies will work for you and some won't. Some strategies will work for you and not for others. And some strategies will work for you sometimes, but not at other times, right? So the trick is finding strategies that work for us and having a massive toolbox of strategies that we can draw on when one of them that we've used in the past doesn't quite fit our needs at that given time. And we can only do that successfully, if we are aware of our own warning signs and if you know your triggers. All right, what are the things that cause you stress? So normally in a face-to-face thing, I will put this up and ask people to sort of think about their stresses. So in your workplace, can you think of, even 2 or 3 things that cause you a lot of stress or distress? All right. And when you think about those things, what are the physical indications that you are becoming stressed? Okay, so there's a number of different ways that different people, that stress might manifest in people. So it could be that you get a cold. It could be that you have acid reflux. It could be that you can't sleep. It could be that you stop going to the gym. So what are the sorts of things that you recognize where you think, oh, hang on a minute, this is not normal. Why am I getting sick every week? Why have I stopped going to the gym? Can you recognize that those are the sorts of things perhaps that you might do or stop doing when you start to become stressed? Does that make sense? I'm going to think that you're saying yes. So thinking about what causes you stress and identifying those things is the first step, because then you can do something about it. All right. The other thing, so recognizing the situations that cause you stress. And then the next thing is recognizing how stress manifests in you. All right. So when we talk about those manifestations, there's 4 different sort of categories. So we have our cognitive presentations, our physical presentations, emotional and behavioral. All right. So if you have a bit of a look at this PowerPoint, I'm sure that you can look through any or all of those columns and think, yep, that happens to me. Yep, that one's me. Yep, that one's me. All right. And you might have something in all of the columns or only one of the columns. Everybody's different. And these are just obviously not an exhaustive list, but these are some of the ones that fit under those 4 main stress presentations. All right. So understanding that and that this is normal is really important. Okay. The other thing I want to talk about too, and here it says for supervisors, but I think it's for anybody. Okay. The first red flag is about behavior. And so this can be noticing behavior in ourselves, but also us identifying behavior in colleagues that's unusual or inappropriate, and often when we are heading into stress and distress and perhaps suffering compassion fatigue, we might develop some of these behaviors. So it could be that we are overly sensitive and react in an aggressive way. It could be avoidance, so we might be avoiding a particular task, or we might be avoiding work altogether. It could be withdrawal, so everybody is going to the lunchroom to have lunch, and somebody's constantly over the last few days or a few weeks or whatever, going and sitting outside by themselves, and just sort of withdrawing from the team. Or anything that's just odd, all right, not your normal sort of behavior. The next one is cognitive difficulties. So perhaps things like poor concentration, memory lapses, confusion, poor decision making. Okay, so remember when I said that compassion fatigue can result in lapses of capability, really, on our part. Continuing emotional signs. So, I am a big proponent, and I teach my vet students and my vet tech students that showing emotion is absolutely normal and absolutely okay. For years and years, vets were taught you cannot show emotion in the clinic or in your consults. Absolutely not. And I think, what rubbish, like we are not robots. Okay, so emotion is normal and emotion is good. Even anger is good because it's a normal, natural emotion, and it's a way of us processing the way that we're feeling. How you behave with that anger is a different story, but feeling anger is quite okay. So emotion is fine and it's good and it's healthy, but when there is continuing emotional signs that are detrimental, I think is what these red flags are about. So if there's continual negativity, continual overreactions, ever dropped your spoon on the floor and just burst into tears? You know, those sorts of irrational things. I mean, I know I've certainly done that before. You know, one of the things that that really struck me when I had my first mental health episode was I was at the kitchen cupboard one morning, and I was just standing there, and I was just crying and crying and crying and crying. And my fiance at the time came into the kitchen. He's like, "Oh my God, Beck, what's wrong?" And I was like, "I don't know whether I want cornflakes or wheat bix." And it was just the most ridiculous thing. But I was in such a bad state. I just could not make the most simple of decisions, you know, and it's that sort of thing that, you know, that's where I don't want people to get, you know. It's still gives me goosebumps because I've come such a long way since then, and passing on this information is just so important. So continuing emotional signs that are outside of the ordinary, I think is a massive red flag. And then sort of any accompanying physical signs, so constant headaches, hangovers, constant fatigue, significant weight changes, whether that's weight gain or weight loss, chest pain. You know, chest pain is a common symptom of anxiety, and so we don't want to ignore that. Okay. All right. This next slide, I want to talk to you just quickly about the cost of poor mental health in the workplace. So the Australian Psychological Society has done a lot of work in this area, and they have indicated that stress-related compensation claims have doubled in recent years, costing around $10.9 billion to the Australian economy every year. That is made up of things like presenteeism. So we know about absenteeism, so that's calling in sick, costs $4.7 million, okay? Presenteeism is when we go to work and we are physically present, but we're not functioning. You know, we're not gainfully employed because we just physically cannot bring ourselves to cognitively or behaviorally engage in the workplace. So we're there, but we're not actually productive. And then stress claims sitting at around $145.9 million. So that's pretty significant. On average, someone with untreated depression will need 3 to 4 days additional sick leave each month. Okay. Mental health is the third biggest health problem in Australia after heart disease and cancer. Many people fear that disclosing a mental illness will lead to workplace exclusion and compromised career paths. And so when I'm talking about mental illness, I'm talking about even like transient compassion fatigue or transient anxiety, transient depression, not just your mental illnesses such as, manic depression or bipolar or, you know, any of those. So this is all of them, you know, the ones that are long-term or lifelong, and the transient ones as well. 86% of employees with stress and depression prefer to suffer in silence. You know, again, often because of the stigma. 83% of respondents reported experienced stigma in some form as a result of their mood disorder. And less than half of those experiencing these conditions will seek support. And that's really scary. You know, we don't want people getting there. And so the reason I put this up is twofold. One is to just, you know, like I was gobsmacked when I learned about all of these figures. So, you know, it's a massive issue in Australia and in all countries, I think. So this is just the Australian data, but also because I think it's so important for everyone to understand that it's not just me, like that we're not alone. You know, there are so many people, you know, suffering psychological ill-being on any given day. You know, so it's not something that we need to be ashamed of and not think about. Keep going. So what's the flip side? You know, what is it about the stuff that we do every day? The flip side is compassion satisfaction. So I mentioned that a little bit earlier. Compassion satisfaction is all about the positive aspects of working as a caregiver, or our payment for caring. And you might have heard that term before. It's about the pleasure we get from being able to do the work we do every day. And with compassion satisfaction, we have to work hard at this sometimes, all right? Because often, if we have 10 great things that happen to us in any given day and one horrible thing, what do we go to bed thinking about that night? Not the 10 great things, the one horrible thing, okay? So we need to change that, all right? We need to change the way that we think about stuff. And so we need to work harder, focusing on what we did well, you know, during a particular shift, a week, a month, during a whole process of you know, perhaps, you know, rescuing a whole heap of animals from, you know, a puppy farm or something. So what are the sorts of things that we can look at in those really stressful times that we did really well and made us feel good? Okay. So this is our counterbalance. And it doesn't just have to be about work successes and achievements. It can also be about life goals and personal achievements outside of work, because these are a major contributor to combating compassion fatigue as well, getting that balance between work and home life. So our senses of accomplishment and joy and achievement, they're the sorts of things that we really want to concentrate on. So how do we do that? How do we balance ourselves? All right. There are lots of different programs that have been developed for the workplace, you know, whether they're workshop-based learning sessions that target team morale or efficiency and performance. You know, all of those things are really incredibly important, not only to an individual, but to the workplace or the organisation itself. So now, an organisation we know has a duty of care to provide evidence-based policies, procedures, you know, all of those things to facilitate a mentally healthy and balanced workplace. However, if the individuals within that workplace are not working at balancing themselves, the workplace can't do that for us. You know, we have to engage in these things ourselves on an individual level, not just expect our workplaces to do that for us. So organisational strategies to combat compassion fatigue are imperative, don't get me wrong, they absolutely have to be done. And without a doubt, they must go hand in hand with our individual duty of care that we have to ourselves, okay? So just as any sort of OH&S requirement that says we as an individual must not engage in behaviours that cause harm or danger to our physical self, and that you know, we really need to take precautions to prevent injury, so must we take all of the precautions to prevent and combat psychological injury, all right? So this is where our engagement in our own psychological well-being is important. Like, the onus is on us. You know, we have to start doing it. There's no magic pill. We have to work hard on it. And then the organisation or the you know, where we work, who we work for, or who we work with, if it's not an organisation, if it's a, you know, a very small private run shelter, you know, all of those people that are engaged in that need to come together. So we do need to understand ourselves so that we can achieve balance, and I'll always keep saying that. And in saying that, there are some concepts that I want to, in terms of, I sort of want to have a talk to you about tonight. And some of these, you know, without a doubt, you've heard of before. And always the first one is resiliency. Okay, resiliency or resilience has been a bit of a, you know, a buzzword for a long time, but it's a really important concept. Okay, when we think of resiliency, we think about our ability to bounce back. Okay, the ability to, and our capacity to recover quickly from difficulties or hard experiences. It's about the psychological strength that we draw on to cope with stress and hardship. And often we talk about it in terms of it being our mental reservoir, and, you know, the reservoir that we call on and can drag things out of when we need to help get through a really difficult situation or a really difficult time in our lives. It's a capacity to cultivate strengths to positively meet the challenges of life. It's easier said than done. And it's our ability to overcome challenges of all different kinds. So it can be trauma, it could be tragedy, personal crisis, or just plain old life problems. And often we say it's our ability to bounce back stronger, wiser, and more personally powerful. What I like to add to this is why are we bouncing back? You know, why can't we bounce forward in that strength and wiseness and personally and that personal power? So think about not just bouncing back, but how can we bounce back stronger and wiser? Have we heard of the psychological bucket? This is another way that it's a really simple way. So it's used quite often to explain the toolbox of things that we might need. So we each have our own psychological bucket relating to resilience, and the contents of this bucket represent a reservoir of our own life experiences, our life lessons, and all of our positive energy. And so when something adverse happens to us, we draw from this bucket to help us cope and respond to those adversities. Each time we draw from that bucket, though, we create small leaks. And if we're not careful, it can become drained, okay? So in this sense, our level of resilience can be determined by not only being able to block the leaks through our use of coping mechanisms, but also through the importance we place on regularly topping up that bucket, okay? So we don't want to be plugging holes all the time, all right? We want to be topping that bucket up with all of the things that create resilience in us. So how do we keep that bucket full, all right? And people have said to me before, duct tape. No, not duct tape. Do you think a holiday will help build resilience? No, I don't think so. Time off is great, all right, but a holiday is not necessarily going to work, because although we tend to feel relaxed and energized whilst we're on holidays, those feelings don't tend to last very long once we come back to work, do they? You know, like you might take 3 weeks holidays, and the first week you're sort of winding down and you're still a little bit highly strung. The second week you're starting to relax. The start of the third week you're like, yeah, I'm pretty relaxed now. And then at the end of the third week, you're thinking, God, I've got to go back to work next week. And then the night before, you're thinking about all of the emails or whatever it might be. And thinking about all of that, you're just as stressed as what you were before you left. Okay. So if you leave all of your resilience building and your regaining of energy to one big holiday block, it's not going to work. You know, we need to be doing stuff every day, regularly, finding other things. Holidays are just part of one of the things that we can do to look after ourselves, but it's not the thing. We need to be taking mini breaks or mini holidays and build them into our daily or weekly routine. And what that looks like will vary for all of us, and we need to find out what works for you, or you need to find out what works for you. But the important thing is prioritizing these activities as opposed to only remembering to do them after the bucket has already been drained, okay? So it could be things like, well, it's as basic as doing something that you love. So like if you like bushwalking or socializing or baking or exercising, you know, any of those things that you really love that recenter you and make you feel good, all right? It could be making use of transition times during your day. So if you're walking from, you know, one block to the next block, what are you thinking about when you're going from that one block to the next block? Okay, probably everything that you've got to do coming into the block that you're heading to, and then everything you've got to do, you know, next hour and the hour after that and the hour after that. Rather than do that, take that minute or however long it might take you to walk to just stop and breathe, you know, look around. What's happening? What can you see? What can you smell as you're walking? It could be as simple as, you know, I often say, you know, how many of you stand in the bathroom looking at the sink, brushing your teeth and thinking about everything that you've got to do that day, rather than take your toothbrush to the window, bring a tea towel if you're a dribbler, but take it to the window and look out. Like, what can you see out there? Can you hear the birds? Like, you know, just things that make you feel good. All right. You're going to be standing there brushing your teeth anyway. You may as well do it looking at a beautiful, you know, garden or or whatever might be out your window. All right. Practice being mindful, okay? And being mindful is not about an hours-long meditation. You know, it could just be taking a few deep breaths in between jobs. It could be, you know, using active listening skills during a conversation. So actually listening to hear, not listening to respond, if that makes sense. It's about being in the moment. I was doing another session this one time at our major Brisbane campus, and we walked outside for morning tea just to stretch our legs and have a break. And like, every participant was on their phone, checking emails, you know, looking at messages, blah, blah, blah. And I looked up and I was looking around, and I'm sure I looked up to roll my eyes at them. But when I looked up, there was this most magnificent owl that was just sitting above all of our heads, and none of them saw it, you know, because they were too busy thinking about all of the stuff that they had to do rather than just being in the moment. All right, there's so much that we miss by not being in that moment. So they're just a couple of ideas, all right, just things to think about. Doing what you love, making use of transition periods during your day, practice being mindful, and be wary of reflecting on feedback. So positive feedback is always really nice, and it should be. Negative feedback, often we will masticate on for a very long time. And so one of the things in the business that we do is, because sometimes that feedback we give ourselves, all right, we're our own worst critics. I could have done this, I should have done that. If only I'd done this, then I could have, you know, I could have saved that animal, or, you know, if I'd done this, then this would have turned out differently. So be really aware of how much time you allow that negative stuff to stay in your brain, okay? Absolutely acknowledge it, compartmentalize it, reflect upon it, and then let it go. All right, move on, learn from it. All right, that's the important thing. So think about what fills your bucket. So what are the sorts of things that you like to do? Really important. The next concept is grit, and I'm sure you've heard of the word grit before. When we talk about grit in this sense, though, it's about the passion and perseverance that we have for long-term meaningful goals. So, you know, often we will attribute this, like all of the research in this is attributed to education, all right? But what I want you to do is think about this in terms of your passion and perseverance for your own mental health and well-being, okay? So it's often about the ability to persist in something you feel passionate about and persevere when you face obstacles. So when you are really sort of heading towards that red zone in our mental health continuum, we often feel like just giving up and ignoring it and not doing anything about it, okay? But when you face that, when you are hitting the edge of that, that's when you absolutely need to persevere and persist and do the things that you know that you should do to look after your mental health. So it's not about intense emotions or infatuation with something for a short period of time. It is absolutely about having direction and commitment to our own mental health and well-being. All of the research indicates that our ability to be gritty, so to stick with things that are important to us and bounce back from failure, is an essential component of success, independent of and beyond what talent and intelligence can contribute. So you could be the most talented artist, the most natural athlete, but if you don't have that perseverance and persistence to work hard at it, somebody else who's working super hard and is super persistent will pip you every time. All right, so you don't have to be naturally gifted around any of this stuff. You just have to be persistent. So thinking about that, we know that grit comes from what we call a growth mindset. And again, growth mindset has been some buzz, you know, a buzz term that's been thrown around a lot recently, lately, but it is so, so important. And essentially what this means is what you focus on, you get more of. So if you are focusing on the negatives, if you are focusing on, you know, always focusing on what is really difficult and really hard, then that's where you're going to sit, and it's hard to maintain positivity. I'm not saying it's easy, particularly when you're going through a really difficult time. And what I want you to sort of think about is this imaginary line. So if you just sort of put your hand out in front of you and run it horizontally, there's this imaginary line. All of the people above that line are in the green zone. They're doing really well, they're productive, they're happy, life is going great for them. All right. All the people below that line are not doing so well. They might have experienced something traumatic. They might be just going through a rough time for any myriad of reasons. It's the job of the people above that line to help drag the people below it back up. All right. Guaranteed at some point you are going to be behind that, like below that line. All right. And so in order to maintain positivity, we have to be immersed in positivity. And sometimes if we are not in a place of great positivity, our colleagues and our friends and our family, it's their job to help us, bring us back. Some people are just not going to engage in that. And I'm sure you can think of people in your previous workplaces or whatever, where there's just a negative Nelly and there's nothing you can do to bring that person out of that negativity. But it doesn't mean you can't try. Okay. So having that growth mindset is a belief in your ability to learn and your ability to improve through effort and perseverance. And in all of these aspects, I'm talking about psychological well-being, because we don't think about that often enough. Okay. So how do we promote a growth mindset in our workplaces and in our communities? First thing is practicing it ourselves. All right. I can do this. I know that if I make sure I go for a walk, or I make sure that I have a break, or I make sure that I go to the doctor when I'm not feeling so well, or whatever it might be, if I make sure I do those things, I am practicing and promoting my own psychological well-being. Okay. I think it's about setting high standards, but in a nurturing environment. So we're setting high standards and a high expectation around looking after our own mental well-being and the well-being of those in our workplace, right? So that's where I'm talking about high standards of, putting our psychological well-being at the top of our priority list. Okay. Encouraging people to hear criticism and learn from it. I think that's really important, because when we are in a negative space, we tend to be really overly sensitive. And I think if we are always encouraging people and teaching, hearing criticism is one of the hardest things to do in life. Learning to take it well is even harder. Okay. So, if we have people in our workplace that are suffering or behaving badly, first thing we need to do is find out why. Is it compassion fatigue? Are they in a bad place? 9 times out of 10, they are. Often they'll say, no, I'm fine. No, I'm all good. Leave me alone. That sort of thing. But again, just keep trying. Just keep trying. Okay. The judge and not judge and be judged, but learn and help learn. Okay, so that's about that hearing criticism. Look, I can see you're not yourself. Is there anything I can do to help? What's happening for you? Can I do anything? Rather than what's up Mary Jane's bum today, which is often what we tend to do. All right. What's my next one there? So modeling a growth mindset in our everyday lives. Let's press the wrong thing, sorry. There we go. So just another graphic about growth versus fixed mindset, I think is really nice. The other thing that's really nice that I wanted to share with you is this quote. So some people get 20 years experience, while others get 1 year of experience 20 times in a row. So that's thinking about applying that fixed mindset with the growth mindset. All right. when we are suffering compassion fatigue, we are often, I can't do anything about me. I just have to keep going. The animals need me. Nothing can be done. I just need to keep going. And we do. We go and we go and we go until we can't, until we are broken. All right. And we don't want to get to that place. All right. So what are the things that we can do? What are the experiences that we can change? How are the same things that we look at that affect us every day? How can we can't change those? So how can we change the way we think about them, or we respond to them, or we behave around them? Okay, that's what this quote's talking about in my mind. So how does all that relate to compassion fatigue? We know that the stages of compassion fatigue are enthusiasm, irritability, withdrawal, quitting, and then we come to pathology versus renewal. All right. So if we think about enthusiasm, think about your career. When you first started working with animals, you're like, yep, this is awesome. We're committed, we're involved, we're ready to make a difference. We put in extra hours, you know, we volunteer everywhere. We're willing to do, you know, everything and more. Okay. We've all been to in that stage. Then we have the irritability stage. So we begin to see the imperfect nature of the systems and the people around us, or the people that are bringing in all of the animals or whatever. So we begin to distance ourselves perhaps from members of the general public, or could be co-workers, it could be family or friends. We could talk unfairly about people and their challenges. We could use humor. Dark humor is something that we use often to try and as a coping strategy, but sometimes it can borderline on that real irritable, just a knee-jerk reaction because of their irritability. We can start having oversights and making mistakes, and we may notice our anger, our cynicism, and a lot of diminished creativity and sadness. Okay. Then we have the withdrawal stage, where our enthusiasm turns sour. We lose our ability to see. I've got students in there, obviously didn't fix that from one of my other PowerPoints. But we lose our ability to see clients, colleagues, whoever as individuals, but rather they become irritants to us. We're tired all the time. We no longer want to talk about work. We might not even want to admit to what we do. We can neglect our family. Relationships is one of the first things that we tend to ignore when we are in a poor psychological state. Our shields get thicker and thicker to block out our pain and our sadness, and so that's a denial. That's a coping strategy. That's not good, because remember when I said when we block out and numb the bad, we actually tend to block out and numb the good as well. Then we have the zombie stage. All right, so this is where we have hopelessness, you know, and it's that whole thing, I've just got to keep going, nothing can change, nothing's going to change, I can't do anything about the way I'm feeling, I just have to keep putting one foot in front of the other and doing what I do every day, and nobody cares. And you know, that sort of really negative stage that we can find ourselves coming into. Often we begin to hate people, particularly in this industry, I think, because we see the damage that they cause to animals, and we really start to, generate this hatred of people, or the public in particular. We develop disdain for humour, no time for fun. We might have a sense that we can't ever do enough, and I can't stop, I can't leave, because nobody can do it as good as I can do it. And look, I had those thoughts, you know, when I had the mental health nurse come and see me, and she wanted to watch what I did in terms of my euthanasia round. And I'm like, you're not watching. That's just, no, you're not. but you can come over and I'll talk to you outside of there. And she said to me, why don't you just get another job? And I said, no, that can't happen. And she's like, well, why can't you get another job? And I said, because I don't know whether the person that comes along behind me will do as good a job as I can do. And now that's ridiculous, because so many of us are fabulous at what we do. But then she said to me, just humour me, if you did get a different job, what would it be? And I said, a paramedic. more trauma. Well done. She just shook her head at me, you know, because that's our kind and caring nature. We want to help, you know, that's just who we are. So then we have this last stage, and we can choose which direction. You know, it's like one of those, for those of you who are as old as I am, those books we used to read as kids. You know, if you choose to go this way, you have a whole different adventure, you know. So we can choose whether we want renewal or whether we want to continue on this pathological pathway. Okay. If we have not addressed the cycle earlier, we come to a fork in the road where we either continue deeper into compassion fatigue or a place of pathology, victimization, where we're overwhelmed, we're perhaps leaving the profession, we're changing positions, we're repeating the cycle. We have somatic illnesses or chronic symptoms. Okay, so we're really unwell, you know, and this was me when I had my very first mental health episode. This was absolutely me. Or we take a turn towards maturation and renewal. All right, so we're thinking about our hardiness, our resiliency. What is it that's going to transform us? You know, this is where the concepts of growth mindset and grittiness come in, and the level of intent and passion that we put towards our own psychological well-being. Now, the thing that did it for me was the very first psychologist that the university sent me to. I walked in there and I was telling my story about how, you know, my job was euthanizing pound animals twice a week, every week. And I did that for about 16 years. And he said to me, it's just a dog. And I just, like, I was blown away. I'm like, I need to get out of here before I throw something at this person. Like, it was awful. Luckily, I had the support of people and I went to a different psychologist. And that man saved my life, literally, because I used to have this one nightmare, and it took me a long time, actually, probably about 10 sessions before I built up the courage to tell him about this, because I was quite ashamed of this particular nightmare. But the nightmare was that I had died and gone to heaven. But when I got to the pearly gates, I could see all of the faces of the dogs and cats, the ones that you remember, you know, and all of you will know what I'm talking about. And I'd be like, oh my God, I'm such a horrible person, they're not going to let me in. And then I would wake up. And that was just this recurring nightmare that I would have week after week after week after week. And he said to me, did you ever stop and think that they were there to welcome you, to say thank you? Thank you for rescuing us, for the mercy euthanasia, you know, any of those sorts of things where you think about the absolute best treatment option for an animal being euthanasia, you know. And just him saying that changed my life. It changed my mindset, you know, and that is what has set my path in this life. And I think if that story resonates with some of you, think about changing your mindset and the way that you think about things when it comes to the difficult things that we do in rescue every day. So it's about, if we can't change it, how can we change the way we think about it? Okay. The truth of these quotes lies in the fact that hundreds of years later, we still hold these views, and in fact, they form the basis of a popular psychotherapy known as cognitive behavioral therapy, which we use in psychology all of the time. Okay. As people think, so shall they be. You know. All right. So the good news is that one can learn skills and mindsets that will change the trajectory towards compassion satisfaction at any stage in that cycle. Okay, so if you resonate in any stage of that cycle, or even your own stage where you're not feeling at your peak performance, know that you can change that. All right. One of the goals of this presentation is for you to all understand the power of mindset and grit. Okay, and hopefully I've given you that. Skills in mindset can be learned and used proactively to address ways to avoid compassion fatigue. And when compassion fatigue does arise, we can address it early with confidence and support, okay? Because we're recognizing the things in ourselves when we start to get stress. We're recognizing the inputs that create our stress and distress, okay? And we've got all of these tools that we could potentially use. I'm going to talk a little bit just quickly, I know we're running over time, about positive psychology. So Martin Seligman is the gentleman that started this, the PERMA model. And he says that the presence of well-being is more than just the absence of ill-being, okay? So we don't want the best that we can hope for in life to be a 0. So if we are heading towards the red and we are -10, all right, we don't want to just come back to 0. We want to go to +20. You know, we want to be flourishing, okay? So the PERMA model has this 5 sort of core elements of psychological well-being. So the first one is positive emotions. So talking about, and it's pretty much what I've gone through this evening. So those positive emotions, making sure that we concentrate on experiencing the positive feelings such as joy, satisfaction, you know, all of those things that we really love. Ease for engagement, so being interested and involved in life. Relationships, as I said, like that's usually one of the first things that we sort of tend to put on the back burner when we're struggling. But we know that people who feel loved and valued and connected with others are much less likely to suffer depression. Meaning, so having a sense of direction and feeling that our lives are valuable and worthwhile and connecting to something bigger than ourselves. I think working with animals, we knock that one over every day, you know, like working with animals and caring for critters that can't care for themselves is so much bigger than us as individuals. All right. So the meaning in our life is there. It's how we shape that and how we make sure that it doesn't shape us in a negative sense in terms of the negative stuff that we can experience. And then A is for accomplishment. So believing in our abilities, our ability in the things that we do every day, mastering new techniques or you know, behavior modification programs or whatever it might be in your life. But it's also about achieving stuff outside of work. So, you know, like it could be that you know, you want to run a half marathon. It could be that you want to write a children's book, you know, anything, whatever it is that you feel you can achieve and goals that you can set yourself. I really like this this particular diagram, I suppose. It was shared with me, or a version of it. I've adapted this one a little bit. But I've got it up on my wall, and I think I look at it every time where I come to a challenging situation that I'm really, really finding quite difficult. And I think if you're in that space, a really great question to ask yourself is, am I doing what matters in a way that matters? Okay. And so if you think about that question and you think about the 2 different directions you could take, okay, so you could listen to all of the hooks, okay, so all of the difficult, unhelpful thoughts that you might have, the negative feelings, the memories that really hook you and take you away and make you do things that are not in line with who you want to be. Or you can listen to your helpers. You know, what are your values? What are your strengths? What are the skills that you have that help you do the things that matter every day? And they will take you towards doing the things that matter and being the person that you want to be. All right. So ask yourself, am I doing what matters in a way that matters? And I reckon that's a super powerful question. Okay. Some other strategies. Communication is first and foremost. It is a dying art, and we have to work on it often in the workplace these days, particularly your bigger workplaces. So making sure that we're initiating workplace communications, participating in formal and informal debriefings, particularly around really stressful or traumatic events, but even just, you know, on a daily basis, making sure that those lines of communication are open. Don't be afraid to put your hand up and say, I just can't do this today. You know, sometimes we just need to take a step back. Not always possible, absolutely know that, but it is something that you really need to think about in terms of a workplace, all right, and what you can do. Reflection, okay, so this is where this is a really good healing process, okay. When we reflect on experiences and we think about the thoughts and feelings and actions that we had within that experience, we can then return to that experience and analyze it with compassion and non-judgmentally, again, thinking and remembering that we're our own worst enemies. If we are doing this reflective practice as a sort of routine thing that we do all the time, we are able to recognize beliefs, attitudes, and values and identify patterns, particularly patterns in our own thoughts and our actions and our beliefs. And once we identify those, if they are not fitting well with our healthy, positive, in the green psychological well-being portfolio, then we can think about ways and identify new ways of thinking, feeling, behaving, and the actions that we might take in those situations. Because as I said before, we can't always change the things that we have to deal with in our workplace and in the jobs that we do and you all do in your shelter environments. So how do we change the way we think about them, the way we feel about them? Or how can we make them into a more positive thing that drives our passion and our compassion for what we do, and our passion and compassion for ourselves? Learning about grief and mourning, I think, is another really important strategy. It's certainly something I had no idea about when I had my first mental health episode relating to the euthanasias and whatnot. And also learning that grief and mourning is not linear. Okay, we can go backwards and round and round and round and draw all of these squiggles in our brain, moving from one stage to the next and then back again. And that's okay. That's normal. Focusing on successes. So this is our compassion satisfaction. What are the times where we alleviated pain and stress and anxiety in our patients? And I know that you don't call them patients in shelters, but I think I always did. But anyway, whatever you call them, whether you're curing illness or injury, whether you're educating your clients, so your owners, the new potential owners that come in, and being a supportive colleague. Having a positive attitude, as I said, not always easy, but knowing that you can make a difference, and if you consistently work at being positive and being involved, it makes you feel better. It's contagious. Work-life balance, I know we all take a bit of a giggle at that, but it is really important to have interests outside of the work that we do. So time with family and friends, a spiritual life, and I don't necessarily mean religious. It could be that your spirituality is embedded in nature, and going for a bushwalk is really what sets you back on a straight path. It recenters you. Being able to say no, again, giggle, because often we are people who can't say no, and we will just do anything and everything and go over and above. But it is important to set limits on what we will do and try and protect our home life. This leave work at work, I already talked about that. It's a furphy. I just need to put a great big red line there, but I put it there just to remind people that we're not robots. Being realistic, we can't do it all. We can't solve all the problems, and to do our best, often we are going to work and we're working at 100 or 110% every day, but that's not sustainable, So if on a particular day you come to work and you're rolling in on 70%, that's okay. Give yourself a break, and your colleagues will be the same. Like they can't work at 100% of the time. So, just your best is good enough, and I think we don't tell ourselves and we don't tell our colleagues that even. Think about this. If your colleague came in and was, 70% of what they normally are, you're not going to give them a hard time. You're going to go, look, I know we've had a crap couple of weeks and it's okay. You would be compassionate towards them. Be compassionate for yourself as well, okay? You wouldn't talk, if you think about the internal dialogue that you give yourself sometimes, you wouldn't talk to your colleague like that. You know, you wouldn't give them the hard time that you give yourself. So don't do it to yourself. Make sense? Everybody's nodding, I'm sure. Be supportive of your colleagues who are doing it tough. We just spoke about that. Understand that not everyone copes the same way, you know, and that's absolutely, somebody might be slamming doors, others might be going for a big long walk, others might be, you know, using dark humor, but not in a macabre way, if there's such a thing. I don't know. But, you know, everybody does cope differently, and what affects one person is not going to affect another person, but that doesn't mean that person that's not affected this time is a bad person. It's just that they perhaps are coping really well, but in a month's time they might come across something that really knocks them flat, and you're coping okay with it. So everybody's different. Get help when you need it, medical, emotional, spiritual, whatever it might be. Okay, jump on that bandwagon straight away. Taking a break, so whether that's a few minutes, a lunch break. Again, we often laugh at lunch breaks, but it's really important. If we don't fuel our bodies, we can't do the work that we want to do. A few days or holidays, and then those micro breaks throughout the day, super important. Take care of the carer, all right, because if you don't take care of you, you can't take care of the animals. And the other thing is to work together as a team. And, you know, we know that this is the strongest defense against compassion fatigue and occupational stress. So when we help each other with tasks that can be really traumatic, so whether that's euthanasia or something else, or just workload in general, you know, teamwork is an amazing capacitor. So utilize that. Support each other emotionally, listen and praise. Often, you know, often people just don't think about praise. It's not that they don't want to. It's just that we tend to forget about that. And then there are others who praise people all of the time. The listening bit is important. Again, remember when I said earlier, listen to hear, not listen to respond necessarily. Debrief and decompress. So just making sure that we have that open communication and focusing on our goals. Okay. So I think this is pretty much the last slide. What is the cost of caring? It's simply time, right? So I told you we were going to talk about time, because everybody says, I don't have time for this stuff, you know, but you do, and you need to make time. So it's taking the time to know and look after your physical and mental well-being. You know, if you've got time to walk from here to the next block, you've got time to look after your mental health and well-being. Immerse yourself in positive thoughts, feelings, and actions. Make use of transition times during your day. And engage in activities that heal your mind, your body, and your soul. And I can't sit here tonight and tell you what they are, because everybody is different, and you need to work that out for yourself. And you need to have a program that you design that becomes habit, right? So we're doing proactive things to fill that bucket, rather than reactive things when we're already down in the depths. Okay. So the key things that are pivotal to enjoying all aspects of your life are balance, perspective, and attitude. All right, they're the things. Attitude's defined by a growth mindset. I absolutely believe that. And that is what generates grit. So that passion and perseverance, relating all of this back to our psychological well-being. Okay. Thank you.
Wow, thanks, Rebekah. That was an amazing talk and a lot to take on board. There's a lot of really helpful information in there. And thank you also for sharing some of your own personal experiences. And I'm sure a lot of us can relate to the things that you have said along the way. I'm not sure, we haven't had any questions come up in the chat box. I was just wondering, does anybody have anything they would like to ask Rebekah at the moment? I know. Yep, sorry.
That's right. I'm just going to flip back to the start while people are thinking.
There was a request in the chat box for a copy of the slides. If that would be possible, Rebekah, I could send those out to everybody.
Yeah,
if
absolutely.
you're happy with that. There was a lot of really good information in there, so it would be great to be able to go back and have a look at it. And also the recording will be up on the website as well.
Yeah, and I do have some resources that I will forward, you know, just some articles and a few other bits and pieces that might, that people might find helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be really great. So I think we've all got a bit of homework to do, going away and sort of doing a bit of reflection and thinking about things that we can do to help ourselves. And I really liked the idea of compassion satisfaction, and focusing on the why we do these things, and the little things, the little wins. It doesn't take much to think about the little good things that we have achieved, and keep those in mind as we're moving forward in what can often seem like a really overwhelming situation. So I think that's a really great place to start as well. I just very quickly, before you all disappear, Rebekah, if you wouldn't mind just unsharing your screen, and then I can share mine. I just wanted to very quickly tell you about our next webinar, and that's with Dr. Jess Beer on the 23rd of November, and she's going to be talking about dog behaviour and handling in the shelter environment. So if you are interested in that, and if you haven't signed up, you can do that on our website. And that will conclude our shelter webinar series for this year, but we are looking at doing another round next year because we've had so much interest, and it's possible that we can get Rebekah back to talk more if people would like that, and provide us with some more valuable resources and skills to deal with these things. So if nobody else has anything that they would like to ask, then I think we can probably call it a night. So thanks so much everybody for tuning up, and I hope you all got out as much out of it as I did. And thank you so much, Rebekah, for you sharing your knowledge and insight with us, and we really appreciate your time.
Most welcome. It was a pleasure.
Great. All right. See you, everybody. Bye.